Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of What If Deku Turned Chaos into Power? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Izuku sat in front of his computer and sighed. Hero agencies and police databases truly did need better security. If a quirkless middle schooler could get into them, imagine what an actual villain could do. The data isn't even encrypted, for heaven's sake. It seemed to be a rather unfortunate pattern he had noticed. It was somewhat pathetic, honestly. Did pro heroes really underestimate villains that much? It was a miracle that they had survived this long. Well, did that say more about the villains or the heroes? Honestly, Izuku couldn't really tell, nor did he care. He drafted an email as quickly as he could. No matter their security system, lives could be saved and Izuku wouldn't be the one to prevent that. Detective Tsukachi? Before you begin to worry, this email is encrypted. No data will be leaked. Smiley face. Anyways, a little birdie told me that you're currently working on a human trafficking ring. Well, do I have good news for you? I took the liberty of checking through the cams placed throughout the city, and noticed that the car you have marked as the last one seen with the latest victim appears quite often heading towards a building within the outer edge of the Mustafu precinct. I, unfortunately, do not currently have the time to figure out the exact address to this building, but it is on cam. There are also a few other cars found, so perhaps you can track those as well? To see if perhaps their range is much larger than originally predicted. Side note, I'd suggest you update your security for your systems. If needed, I can get in touch with your IT team, although I suppose you wouldn't be too thrilled about that. I hope this information helps your team one way or another. A mere informant, smiley face. The response was near instantaneous. A low chuckle escaped from Izuku's lips. He didn't know much about the head detective, although he hoped he was reliable. He had no way to guarantee that he wouldn't simply just delete the email, much less trust the information. He opened the email, hoping that it wasn't too bothersome. Informant? How did you get this email? Or this information? How would I know to trust you, when I know near to nothing about you? You didn't even give me a name to call yourself. If this info is true, why go through the trouble of gaining access to my email, rather than filing an anonymous tip, where you could guarantee that we wouldn't figure out who you were? Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. Izuku was growing exasperated. He knew the detective meant well, but the longer he waited to see whether the information was true or not, which it was, the more people that would end up hurt, or worse. He let out a sigh, trying to keep his response as pleasant, albeit snarky, as possible. Detective Tsukachi? It hurts that you have so little faith in me, really. The information is entirely trustworthy. I sent clips of each time the van appeared within the cameras attached below, and of course you can check for yourself. Although, please do hurry, I personally would like to keep the carnage as minimal as possible, wouldn't you? Either way, if you decide to ignore my perfectly helpful info, you'll find that once you investigate that it'll lead you to the exact place. Assuming you find this out before they change base, again. Entirely your choice, of course. And the IT department? Are you going to bring it up with them, or shall I? He rubbed his eyes. He needed another cup of coffee to deal with this. Maybe 2. Or 3. Hell, he needed the whole pot at this point. He stood up from the chair at his desk, wincing as he heard his bones pop as he stretched. A warning he had been sitting for far too long. Izuku stood at the door for a moment, listening for his mother. She was at work more often than not, but better safe than sorry. The house was silent, only his quiet breathing could be heard. Perfect. He walked down to the kitchen and prepared the coffee maker. He groaned as it started, not patient enough to wait. A grumble escaped his lips as he noticed the time. He had his classes at the nearby dojo soon, and as much as he enjoyed them, he wasn't in the mood for another long sparring session. Izuku scrambled back upstairs as soon as he poured a mug, wanting to check his email once more before heading to the train station. His inbox was empty. Nothing yet from the detective. He sincerely hoped that meant that he was checking his information, so that the ring could be apprehended. It was out of Izuku's hands now, He couldn't control the detective, so he decided getting to his dojo on time would be the next thing he needed to focus on. Let it be known, Izuku hated the train. It was loud and often crowded with nosy people. Not to mention, if anything happened, say a villain attack while the train was moving, there were few exits. Now of course, the latter wouldn't matter too much on a good day. But of course, with Izuku feeling restless on the train, it couldn't be that easy. Naturally, there had to be some random guy with a mutation quirk trying to mug everyone on the train. Izuku was losing hope for a grain of common sense in their current society. Mugging? An entire train? How could anyone be that brainless? One way or another, this guy was. Money in the bag. All of you. I have a gun and I'm not afraid to use it. His voice was guttural, and honestly Izuku would have thought that the mugger had some kind of plan on how the hell to make this work with how confident he was. That was until he noticed just how bad his hands were shaking. So, maybe the confidence was a bluff. Makes sense. Izuku rolled his eyes as the mugger made his way up to him. His mutation quirk wasn't anything to be scared of, truthfully. Izuku had endured much worse via Bakugo's explosions. He raised an eyebrow at the man. Izuku just wanted to get to his station. This is not what he signed up for this morning. There was no way he was giving this random, idiotic man his money. Did you not hear me, kid? Money in the bag. Unless you want the alternative, of course. The mugger's voice shook as he spoke. How was anyone following his directions? He was clearly getting antsy and he had no control over the situation. Izuku bet he could probably disarm the man in a heartbeat. So he did. He quickly grabbed the man's arm, knocking the gun out of his hand. Fortunately, the safety was still on. Did this idiot even know the basics on how to fire a gun? The entire train car stood in silent shock for a moment. I mean, watching a small, unassuming, plain kid knock a gun out of a fully grown man's hand wasn't something that happened. Every day, was it? Oops. That surely brought unwanted attention onto himself, huh? Some deity seemed to be smiling upon the green-haired kid today, as he noticed that he had, finally, gotten to his stop. With a small, nervous smile, he removed himself from the awkward situation and left the train car. He hurried off, not looking back. Izuku wanted the ground to swallow him whole. The dojo was still a good 5 to 10 minute walk, and he knew how much his instructor valued punctuality. It was one of the main premises they were taught. He heard murmurs of gossip from other students of those who had been denied because of them being late one too many times. Besides, his instructor put valuable time into training the group for no cost. It was the least they could all do, honestly. It was a basic form of respect. The class seemed to pass by at a snail's pace. His head was not in the place it needed to be, he realized as his back forcefully hit the mat, again. Midoriya? Are you okay? Normally I can barely get on the offensive, much less knock you into the mat. Ojiro, a kind boy who had been going to the class as long as Izuku could remember, spoke to him. Yeah, my mind is elsewhere. Sorry, I must not be the greatest sparring partner at the moment, huh? He admitted apologetically. He wasn't one to half-butt something, but he could not get himself to focus right now, his thoughts clearly set on coming up with a variety of responses in which he could receive from the detective. No worries. Do you want to take a break? Try and sort your thoughts out a bit. It's not good to do this if you're not entirely here. Izuku truly believed that the boy in front of him was a godsend. Yeah, Ojiro, that'd be great. Thank you so much, he responded before he walked over to the restroom, splashing some water on his face. A groan slipped from his mouth as the pain hit from being slammed into the ground. His muscles ached. Perhaps it'd be best if he switched his attention. At least it'd lead to less injury. Once he felt that he was ready enough, he headed back out. Thank you, Ojiro, it really is appreciated. A small grin escaped onto his face. He truly was grateful for the blonde. He was the first true friend he had in a while and didn't seem to treat him differently despite his quirklessness. He didn't treat him as if he would break upon contact. Izuku was observant enough to notice how the others in the dojo would go easy on him after hearing his quirk status. It irritated him, despite him not mentioning it to the others. It was nice that Ojiro didn't treat him like he was fragile, because if there is one word that couldn't, be used to describe him, it was fragile. Or perhaps patient, but that wasn't the point. I think that's enough for today though. We're almost out of time, you should go check on what's bothering you. The blonde gave him a gentle smile. If it was anyone else, Izuku probably would have felt patronized. Fine. But next time, you're going down. I'll see you later, Izuku said before leaving. As he got onto the train, he couldn't be more grateful that it was silent, with no sign of an idiotic mugger. A slightly relieved sigh escaped him. The first thing he did upon getting home was check his email. Environment. Firstly, your information has been helpful, no matter how you got it. As much as I hate to admit it, I can't believe we overlooked it. We are one step closer to bringing this thing down, thanks to you. Secondly, the IT department has noted your escapades. I hope that they keep you out, as this information isn't for the general public. While I hope that this is a one-time thing, I can already tell that this is likely going to occur again, as much as I hate to admit it. Detective Naomasa Tsukachi. Izuku had a grin on his face. So many unanswered emails to hero agencies, other precincts' police departments. Could you blame him if he was glad to finally be able to help someone? Although he couldn't blame the others who would trust an anonymous email, who had obviously hacked into their systems and gave advice to heroes about their quirks or information on cases that weren't entirely disclosed to the public, Izuku could, and would, say himself that he wouldn't trust him in their shoes. Boil their loss. Take that All Might. Telling children that they couldn't be heroes without quirks. How was that heroic? He was going to save people. He'd make sure of it even if it was the last thing he'd do. Because, unfortunately for the number one pro hero, Midoriya, Izuku ran off pure spite. And attempting to prohibit one's ambitions is a very good way to make someone feel spiteful. Izuku had been in contact with the detective fairly often since they had solved the trafficking ring case. The two worked well together, with Izuku's ability to find overlooked information and Tsukachi's ability to enact the plans out legally. The two had become quite the unstoppable pair, albeit grudgingly on the detective's part. Izuku couldn't blame him entirely. He'd be pretty off-put if someone managed to show up one day and managed to do his own job better than himself. The boy sighed as he pushed away from the desk. He had managed to finish all the online courses offered, which although only offered up until the last years of high school, and had very little left to do to take up time within the days. It was difficult to keep him busy, as he tore through anything given to him quickly, puzzles solved within minutes. Well, there were a few things that could keep him entertained. He clicked onto his chess program that he often used when he simply couldn't keep himself on one task for too long. There stood a message from one of his favorite opponents, one of the few that he was genuinely well matched with. There were a mix of wins and losses shared between the two, unlike when Izuku randomly matched with chess players, where he tended to beat others quite quickly. Redacted, as mysterious as they were, they had their account well encrypted. It had briefly flitted across his mind that if he desperately wished to, he could likely spend a while and reach into their system, but he had ultimately ended up deciding that if they were that willing to go the lengths to hide their identity, perhaps it was for the best. He would be a hypocrite if he thought otherwise. His account was well guarded. He smirked as the moves passed by. He wouldn't have been able to tell you the duration of the game, all he knew was it was long. Pieces continued moving across the board. Until they didn't. He groaned. As he noticed the screen shifted into one indicating his loss. Izuku couldn't believe that he had made the mistake that he did. Izuku stood up, wondering how much time had passed since he had started the game. He opened the pantry, looking for anything he could eat. Empty. Had it really been that long since he had bought food? No matter, he grabbed some yen out of one of the drawers, and shoved on his red high tops, and left his apartment building. He noticed the darkened sky. Was it really that late? Izuku continued on, ignoring any looks he got from passers-by. He likely looked disheveled, after sitting so long in his chair. Upon arriving at the convenience store, he quickly headed straight towards the aisle he needed, the coffee aisle. He was running dangerously low on what could honestly have been his lifeblood. Izuku noticed the other man that stood among the aisle, a dark-haired man, who looked almost exhausted as he felt. He grabbed the coffee he needed, tried to not stare at the man, who he had since identified as Eraserhead, and quickly tried to head into another aisle to grab basic necessities. Although the chance of the underground hero recognizing him while in civilian clothes was close to impossible considering he didn't do anything too hands-on, He didn't want to risk anything. Okay, so sue him. The man made him a little bit nervous. Whatever, it wasn't as if he was going to talk to him. Izuku hurried up to the cashier and paid for his items. The looks he got were irritating. He could feel them pierce his skin. He couldn't exactly blame them considering a small boy buying coffee and his own groceries isn't quite the norm. He worked his way out the convenience store as quickly as he could, hoping for a quick journey home. Of course, that would make him lucky if that happened. Honestly, at this point it felt as if the universe held a grudge against him. Very little worked in his favor. It's getting a bit ridiculous at this point, he thought, as he heard a muffled sound of pain from the alleyway he was passing by. Two men were cornering a very obviously uninterested girl. "You beach. We're just trying to have some fun." Izuku grimaced. He pulled his hood over his face. Maybe it was his own fault. He could never just ignore anyone who needed help. The guilt would eat him alive. He was grateful for how large the sweatshirt was on him, as it somehow managed to cover all of his unruly hair and most of his face, especially in the dull lighting. He hoped his martial arts training would be enough to deal with it. Unfortunately, before he could use the element of surprise to knock the two men off their feet, the girls started yelling at him to help. The two men turned. Now don't get Izuku wrong, he usually has confidence in his skills. But these two were looming above him and they definitely weren't as lithe as him. He wondered to himself whether he could truly stop the two. The situation seemed awfully dire. But once one of them swung towards him, it was as if a switch in his head flicked. He ducked, much quicker than he had ever before, and kicked the man's knee as hard as he could. Which, if he had actually been able to think properly in that moment, he would have noticed was with a lot more force than what should be possible for a malnourished, short, middle schooler. A 5-point contact was likely necessary to activate his quirk, if anything was to base off how the man had acted. Izuku couldn't let him touch him. The second man seemed conflicted in constraining the girl and helping his buddy. Izuku acted on instinct, pressing the pressure point on the quirk user's neck. Somehow with enough force to knock a grown man out. He'd reflect on that in a minute. For now he had to worry about the friend, who had decided to act. A grin grew on Izuku's face. He let his instincts overcome any rationality. He kicked the guy's groin. "How's that for fun, sicko? Think about the next time you harass someone." Izuku felt the last wisps of the moment wash over him. He shook off whatever that was that he was feeling. It certainly was more than adrenaline. He turned to the girl, who stood in shock. She was older than him, clearly in high school. Her periwinkle hair seemed a bit disheveled, but other than that she seemed okay. "Do you have anything to tie them up with?" When she shook her head in response, he glanced around the alley for anything he could use. Finally, he took out the shoelaces from a pair of shoes he saw, and quickly tied their wrists in a makeshift handcuff. "That'll only work while they're out, so I suggest you call the police." "Are you okay other than that? They didn't hurt you too much, did they?" She shook her head. "Thank you for that. Aren't you too young to be a vigilante?" "Vigilante? Vigilante?" All Might had said he could never be a hero without a quirk, but he never said anything about vigilantism. His grin grew larger at that. "Ah, no, just passing through. You should probably call the police on these two. I have to get going, but I'm glad you're okay." He grabbed the bags he hadn't even noticed and dropped them at some point. A slight wave, and Izuku was gone. Once he felt he was a safe distance from, well, whatever that was, he pulled down the hood and allowed himself to think. Was that a quirk? Whatever he had done was more than should have been possible for him. It made him think of something. He'd have to research it, but if he was right, no matter, quirk or otherwise, he'd need to do more than just luck to take down criminals. He'd need to bulk up muscle, and if he could design some support items, he could likely upcycle materials from Dagoba Beach, which he could also use as a place to train. A purple-haired boy nudged his shoulder, making Izuku flinch. As he turned, he noticed the upturned brow. Izuku had been mumbling, hadn't he? "Great. You training for the UA hero exam? Or just working out for the sake of it because whatever you've been muttering about seems hefty?" Something like that. Why? Izuku's head titled. That was not quite the question he had been expecting. "Count me in." A girl with pink dreadlocks jumped out from behind the other. "And you mentioned support items? I think you and I would make great babies." Izuku's brain seemed to shut down. He hadn't even noticed her, but it was more her words that bothered him. I've told you. Inventions. Otherwise you make it sound. The next words were lost on him as he slowly processed everything. These two wanted to be around him? That was new. He wasn't going to let this slip through his grasp. He smiled brightly at the two. If you're sure, meet me at Dagoba tomorrow. Does 11 in the morning work? Sounds good. The name is Shinso Hitoshi. This idiot behind me is Hatsume. The purple-haired boy grumbled, ignoring the cries from Hatsum next to him. Midoriya Izuku. It's nice to meet you both. This is our stop, but bring me some blueprints tomorrow. I want to see what you have in mind. Hatsum cheered before the two got up and left the train. Izuku sat for a moment. Then another beat passed. Had he just made friends? I mean, sure he had Bakugo when he was younger, or as he had dubbed him, Kakin. But they had grown apart as the years passed. And that was putting it gently. He couldn't hold a grudge against the boy, it was simply a case of the environment nurturing his bad habits. It was like how school was for him, but the opposite. Where Izuku was taught that he was useless and was worth less, Bakugo had been conditioned to believe that he was better, above the rest of them. Could he blame him entirely for that? As much as it hurt once the boy started to treat him differently, he couldn't force himself to be too bitter about it. And there was his theory about what had happened with the two men in the alley. If he was right, if that truly was his quirk, then Izuku suffered for nothing. He was shaken from his thoughts as the train reached his station. Izuku scrambled off it and hurried to his apartment. Thinking could wait. He didn't want to be interrupted yet again on his way home, so he tried to pay attention to his surroundings. And yet somehow, his situational awareness was clearly not up to par, as Eraserhead stopped in front of him, coming out of what seemed like nowhere. A kid shouldn't be out so late. Why don't you let me walk you home? I don't want to be a bother. I'm almost there anyway. Izuku rushed the words out of his mouth, not wanting to give the man more to worry about. The underground hero surely had better things to do. Don't worry about it, kid. Just let me get you home safe. Izuku sighed before nodding. The two walked towards the apartment building in comfortable silence before the man next to him spoke. I saw you in the store. Why is a kid as young as you buying the groceries alone this late? A look was shared between the two. Well, my mom is really busy and we were kind of running out of stuff to cook with. I just wanted to make it easier on her. The lie slipped out from his lips easily. He hadn't seen his mother in a while. All he knew was that the apartment was paid for and every once in a while money was sent for food. Anyways, this is my building, thank you, Eraserhead. The man looked at him suspiciously. Don't mention it. Keep out of trouble, kid. Izuku doubted that he could promise that, so he just nodded meekly before heading into the building. He had something to research, plus he needed to think through support items and workouts for tomorrow. And maybe look through some cases again. He was grateful for the coffee he had bought. Izuku could already tell that he was probably going to need it. Izuku quickly paid for the water as well as a cup of coffee. He could already tell he was going to need it. Taking a sip, ignoring the scorching feeling on his tongue, he let out a sigh. Izuku couldn't really explain why he had let Shinso and Hatsum come to his vigilantism training, not that they knew that was what it was, but still. He thought about what he had been researching last night. Juggernauts. A concept that seemed to die out as quirks developed. But it seemed to fit whatever had happened in that alleyway. The concept of someone who, no matter the situation, would prevail as the winner. Them being virtually unstoppable. Izuku knew his limits. He knew he shouldn't have been able to beat those two men last night with relative ease. There was just one issue. There wasn't a way for him to truly prove it. He could test the theory. Throw himself into fights way beyond his capabilities, but what if his theory was wrong? He could end up severely injured. Izuku sighed. Besides, if it turns out he is right, what is he going to do? It wouldn't change anything. So it didn't matter. Not yet anyways. He would focus on strengthening himself, to push himself towards his ambitions through his own effort rather than using a quirk as a crutch. Izuku shook his head, trying to dislodge the thoughts as he arrived at the beach. He needed to focus if he wanted to improve. A deadpan voice broke him out of his head. So, Midoriya, what's the plan for this training of yours? You don't seem like the type to do anything on a whim. Shinso stared at him, his eyes filled with something Izuku couldn't quite recognize. What's the plan for my babies? There's a lot of scrap here that could be put to use, but we need an idea of what to make first. Mei excitedly chirped. Izuku had no idea how she was that energetic in the morning. He needed to have a couple cups of coffee before he even was somewhat coherent. Izuku looked at Shinso and grabbed a notebook from his bag. What's your quirk? Limitations? Weaknesses? I can do some basic analysis to figure out how you can train it, although most of the work we do here will probably be physical. He continues to mumble until he notices the two in front of him staring at him with wide eyes. Shinso's eyes narrowed at him before grudgingly speaking. My quirk is called brainwash. If I ask someone a question and they respond, they are essentially under my control. That's perfect for hero work. You could easily sort out so many situations with little to no violence. Hostage situations would be quickly sorted out. Hell, you could stop villains in the act as many are so eager to speak about their ideals. He trailed on, until he noticed once again that he was mumbling, sorry, bad habit of mine. The purple-haired boy stared at him with wide eyes. You don't think it's a villain's quirk? Of course. Your peers must not be thrilled with it. Well, let me tell you, quirks are just mere tools. Advancements to genes that some use to their advantage. Crutch, so to say. Besides, most people rely far too heavily on their quirks. It's kind of sad, honestly. No matter the drive or nature of a person, only their quirk affects whether they can be a hero or not. It was at that moment, a deeper voice decided to speak up. Well said, problem child. If only my students in the heroic course had half the sense you do. Izuku could feel himself flinch as he was shaken to his core. Slowly, it felt almost comical as his eyes rested on the underground hero that was behind him. Eraserhead? Izuku could feel himself clam up. He hadn't intended for the man to hear him. Hell, he hadn't intended for anyone besides Shinso and Hatsum to be here. Dagoba Beach wasn't exactly populated. Shinso seemed like he had blue-screened. He turned to Izuku. You did not tell me that he was going to be here? Izuku lightly scratched the back of his neck. Yeah, well, I didn't exactly know that myself. He shifted his eyes to the disheveled man. He wasn't dressed in his hero clothes, so it wasn't like he had noticed them while on patrol. Why are you here, anyways? Not to be impolite or anything. Just, not many people stop by here. I happened to be passing by and overheard. Eraserhead spoke, little to no intonation in his voice. You've got a good head, kid. I'm glad you're using it properly. Oh, thank you. I don't think it's anything that's special really, but I'm glad you think so. That I've got to go unfortunately, I have errands to do, but are you going to be here again? I'd like to hear more about these analyses of yours. What about next week? Same time, same place. Eraserhead sighed, before glancing at what seemingly was a message on his phone. Yes, Shinso, Hatsum, and I are going to be training here, so presumably, his eyes widened as he processed what the man was saying. Good. I've really got to get going, but I'll see you, kid. As the man walked off, Izuku turned to the other two. Did that just happen? Did you just get the man who single-handedly expelled his entire class this year to agree to help us with training? Shinso raised his eyebrow at the green-haired boy in front of him. Hatsum didn't seem half as bothered as the other two. Midoriya, he's got me thinking. You said you weren't applying for UA's hero course, but what about with the support course? She jumped up, her pink hair bouncing around with her. Support course? I don't exactly invent though, he muttered confusedly at Mei's statement. He was going to apply to the general ed course, as somewhat of a last resort. He knew he wouldn't be able to make it into the hero course. What? With their biased hero exam. Not that he was supposed to know about that, but he had gotten a bit too curious one night and had managed to waltz around UA's firewalls. He still thought that perhaps Nizu was allowing him to do so, because surely he couldn't outsmart the creature with a much higher IQ than anyone could dream of. Robots of all things. As if only people with flashy quirks could be heroes. It irritated him to no end. Although UA was one of the few schools, the only one actually who allowed quirkless students into their hero course. Why allow them in, if the exam to get in is almost impossible for them? Or people who have quirks perfect for heroics that just aren't physical. Izuku sighed. It was not worth getting frustrated over at the moment. Besides, he couldn't deny that he wasn't intrigued on how he would possibly make it into the support course despite not being the best with his hands. It isn't quite as common, but analysis is included in what you can apply for the support course. As long as you can present it, it should work. Hatsum grinned, her eyes bright as they met his. And seeing as you pulled out that notebook, I'm guessing you do. Izuku let that sink in. He could do something other than the general education course? He had his hero analysis for the future volumes, which could easily work well enough for the presentations. Or maybe he could compile his information into a new notebook, with those of which he was the most proud of? It was a sound idea. Something he would have never thought of without Hatsum. Hasjum, you genius. A grin grew on his face. I know just what to do. Not to interrupt you two, but weren't we going to train? Shinso chuckles at the two nearby. Well, not today. I'm gonna make a quick schedule for you, as we can't meet every day. I trust you to stick to it. He held Shinso's gaze, not backing down. I know it'll be rough at first, but I'll make sure it's devised to push you past your limits but not hurt you. We want to improve, but injury will hinder that. Shinso seemed shocked at how in the zone Izuku was. There wasn't a stutter or crack in his voice. Do your worst. Oh, I will. Izuku's eyes burned with a fire that Shinso hadn't seen before in the shorter boy. What had he gotten himself into? The teens had quickly started hauling the various trash from the beach. Hasjum picking around, salvaging what she could for her various babies. The sun burned bright above them, the sweltering heat making them tire quicker. Izuku grabbed the bottles of water and tossed two of them to Hasjum and Shinso respectively. Drink this. It won't do you any good to get heat exhaustion. Let me know if you need a break. It's better to listen to your body than to needlessly injure yourself under the guise of improvement. He screwed off the cap of his own water bottle, downing it fairly quickly. We'll only do an hour more. I don't want to keep you guys out too late. The two looked at each other, sharing a glance, before smiling at Izuku. Yes, sir. Hasjum mock saluted him, before all three about keeled over laughing. The trio quickly got back to work, morale just as high when they had started. He appreciated them taking him seriously and not endlessly complaining about the work. The three quickly exchanged numbers once the sun seemed to begin to set, reflecting bright, bold oranges and yellows over the waves that crashed against the beach. The trio promised to schedule another meeting as soon as they could. Was this friendship? Izuku knew that whatever he had with Bakugo wasn't a friendship, and hadn't been for a long time. It weighed heavily on him to think about. When they were younger, they had cheered together about how they were going to be the best hero duo, and now Bakugo hurt him mercilessly. Another way that treatment of quirks within society frustrated him. It failed everyone, albeit in different ways. Izuku knew he wanted to, had to change that. He'd be the first quirkless hero. One way or another. No one could stop him. Not Bakugo, not Yue's biases, not even All Might. Because, once Izuku truly put his mind to something, he would consume mind, body and soul, to make sure it got done. This was a beginning for him. A fresh start. But first, before doing anything rash, he needed to prepare himself. Both for the support exam and what would await him on the streets. Izuku had a feeling it was going to be a long journey, full of obstacles, but he knew, deep down, that it'd be worth it in the end. Hatsum and Izuku were laying on the floor of his room, as they pored over his set of notebooks. You should definitely get a new notebook and fill it out with your best ones. Also, it'd be cleaner. One of the notebooks is charred, Midoriya. They look as if they've been through hell and back. As much as he hated to admit it, Hatsum had a point. There was a variety of damage from the obvious charring from Bakugo, to unpleasant words being written on some, and the obvious water damage from when they had been thrown in a fountain. Inevitably, Izuku needed to get some new, undamaged ones. You're probably right. So who should be included in it? Probably a mix of heroes, from well-known ones to underground ones, so I can show I'm not just paraphrasing a bunch of sites? As a lot of them don't include underground and lesser-known heroes since there's less footage. Izuku mumbles to himself and continues, trying to avoid the underlying topic at hand. The two discussed as Izuku was working on the notebooks, trying to make his usually near illegible handwriting at least somewhat readable. He made sure his sketches were neat, labeled when necessary. He needed this to be near perfect. He didn't have a quirk that would work well for support and needed to prove that he could be a great asset and student all the while. Izuku knew he had general education as a safety net to fall back on, but what was the fun in settling? Izuku ran a hand through his deep green curls, sighing. The silence in the room was comfortable, yet deafening at the same time. So, Hatsum looked up from whatever blueprint she was working on. What got you into analysis? It's not the most common hobby, but I guess I can't say much as I make babies for fun. His gaze snapped up. He smiled fondly before speaking to Hatsum. Well, I originally wanted to be a hero. I had actually called them hero analysis for the future, up until the 12th or 13th notebook, I think. I had someone bring me back to the harsh reality, but it's always been the one constant I've had, so I continued it. He tried to not let his eyes wander to his closet, where he knew a lot of his old all-might merch was. He had quickly realized just how much of his merch was of the hero, because once it was all in the box hidden deep within his closet, it left his room pretty bare. The blank walls only had a few hero posters left on it, and the odd blueprint here or there from Hatsum. The pink-haired girl nodded, seemingly satisfied with the answer for now. The two continued chatting, occasionally consulting one another when they got stuck on a portion of their ideas for the practical exam. Izuku felt much more calm than he had in a while. He couldn't name the last time he had been able to feel comfortable spending time with someone alone. It was nice. Not something he was used to, but something he didn't quite want to let go of. He decided the question that had been burning on his mind since he had met the aberrant duo. How did you and Shinso meet anyways? You two seem to be of two very different temperaments. Hatsum broke out into a grin. Oh, Hitoshi? He's the perfect candidate for bringing my babies into the spotlight. Neither of us were the most popular for one reason or another, so we stuck together. She twirled some of her hair around her finger. Izuku could tell there was something more to tell, but he dropped it. It wasn't his business to pry. They had a right to their secrets, and they hadn't forced him to talk about anything he didn't wish to. They sat for a moment, relishing the tranquility that stood between the two. Neither were too keen on getting back to work just yet, as the cricks and stiffness of their muscles settled in. Izuku stretched, looking out the window, trying to gauge the time. He blinked at the intense oranges and reds that were starting to mix together as the sun set. Was it really getting that late? Time had flown as they worked, and he couldn't have been more grateful with Hatsum's company and help. Do you need me to walk you home, Hatsum? It's getting kind of late, Izuku asked lightly, knowing she lived a bit further. I'll be fine, no worries. A large grin grew on her face, brightening her features. Hatsum laughed before adding, besides, don't be so formal. We're friends and we'll be making super cute babies together once we get into UA. Her cheer was contagious, and Izuku could feel a fond smile on his face. Alright, you stay safe. I'll see you Saturday, he replied before heading back into his home. Izuku had just sat down as he noticed a notification on his chess app. Redacted had been unusually silent lately, so he hadn't messed with it too much as he beat most other opponents rather quickly. It had been sitting in the back of his mind, not stressing him but remaining slightly unsettling. Surprisingly, despite months of games, him and Redacted had never used the message function of the site. They had merely sent games back and forth, moving pieces when time allowed them to do so. Well, up until now, that is. Redacted. Apologies for the radio silence, my friend. Something had come up for me, but I am free again if you're up for a game. Izuku debated for a moment on how to respond. He didn't want to press, but worried a bit about the other nonetheless. Juggernaut, no worries. I hope everything's alright. He quickly clicked around the site, starting a new game. Izuku cracked his knuckles before settling down in his chair. These games always lasted large amounts of time, a couple hours being the minimum. He had memories of a time where they had to spread a game over a week, as it was taking so long. He moved pieces, trying to play smart while keeping an eye out for an opening to execute a strategy that he hadn't used against the other yet. And there. Redacted had made a fatal mistake of leaving one of his most important pieces unguarded. A coy grin slid onto his face as moves exchanged between the two and the game continued on. Until, checkmate, Izuku cheered as he watched the bold text, "You win," appear on his screen. Finally, a win was always fulfilling against the other, knowing he worked his butt off for it. Redacted wouldn't let him win out of pity, nor just for the sake of it. He had to earn his victories. A message popped up and he clicked it. Izuku rubbed his eyes as they attempted to glaze over. It was getting pretty late. And he was definitely going to need to sleep soon. Redacted, clever. Your moves were well disguised. You caught me off guard, smiley face. Redacted, it is always a pleasure to play against you, Juggernaut. You fit your name well. Juggernaut, thank you. I created the strategy myself, actually. Juggernaut, it's just by chance your moves allowed me to use it. Smiley face. Redacted, you created it yourself? That's awfully impressive. Juggernaut, it wasn't anything too difficult. Just was noticed common moves in those I played during your absence and thought it could be interesting to try and think of a way to strategically guarantee a win, no matter what the other moves. Izuku had a lot of time on his hands. He wrote code, created strategies for a variety of different games, and was currently working much above his grade level in online school. He just constantly needed something to do that could SMLT his brain and prevent him from getting too bored. Redacted, don't be modest. Redacted, I got to sign off for now, but don't be a stranger, smiley face. Izuku hummed to himself as he let the computer's screen darken. He knew he should sleep, but his brain seemed to disagree as he pulled out the sheet that he had used with May to decide on which heroes to include within his practical exam. Eraserhead, Present Mike, Miruko, and Hawks were the four he knew he definitely wanted to do. Izuku needed one more to fill the notebook, and he and May had debated the entire time on who it should be. He thought back a bit to Redacted and his mannerisms. They reminded him an awful lot of another big influence to the hero world. He wrote in bold letters on the top of the list, Nizu. Albeit not the most common nor popular in the hero world, he was definitely a vital part of it. His IQ quirk was something that Izuku found truly interesting. Besides, it led to a lot of other things that could be mentioned, even on more broader terms. What animal was he? If his being didn't count as a mutant quirk, what determines whether a mutant quirk can be identified at birth, rather than just being genes from their parents before them? Really, Nizu could lead into a lot of different new advancements on quirks. Izuku had also always been fond of Nizu, after having read about his history and how he had been treated within a lab. He found he could relate in some way, seeing himself in how Nizu chose to work with the force that had essentially treated him poorly and inhumanely, much like how he wanted to save those, no matter the person or how they had treated him in the past. A determination burned through his chest. He was going to make this the DMN best analysis book the judges had ever written. He would put hours, days of work into it if necessary. Because Izuku wasn't perfect, no, but he would not let anyone say he half-butted it. He would make it an undeniable choice about being let into UA. He had so much more to prove than other applicants, and he would make sure to exceed expectations. Izuku quickly settled back into his desk, knowing there's no way he was going to get any sleep now. He was already buzzing with energy, ready to get something done. The computer had a variety of tabs open, some directly related to his applicants, as well as a variety of topics on theories of how their quirks could work, how they could improve, and weaknesses. No stone was going to be left unturned. He quickly opened a new tab. He knew there wouldn't likely be as much about Nizu, and more rather of him being mentioned in articles about UA. But Izuku wasn't expecting for there to be absolutely nothing written about his quirk other than the very foundation. Most reporters merely mention it to be an IQ quirk before jumping to something or other about UA. So he'd have to dig a little deeper. No matter, he'd tear down any obstacle necessary. The easiest way would be to try and get into the UA database. Although he thought of the firewall and shuddered. It would take a while, even with his knowledge and experience for hacking into the police database. That was going to be a cakewalk compared to this. Izuku threw a final look at the time on the side of his monitor, trying to decide whether it was worth going to bed, despite the fact he knew he wouldn't sleep well, or merely grabbing coffee and pulling the all-nighter and continuing on with his notebook. 5 a.m. Yeah, he was going to need that coffee, all right. Izuku was upset. Well, that'd be the greatest understatement yet. He was said. Nedzu was likely one of the most brilliant creatures that existed on this planet. Maybe he was the most. Yet he was subjected to a variety of experimentations actual torture that were in no way justifiable. I mean, what did any of the things listed lead to? Hell, they were inhumane. Nothing would be worth forcing someone to go through that. It was a wonder Nizu hadn't turned to villainy yet. There were people who had dropped their morals for less. The fact he even helped with heroes to protect those who treated him as he did was honorable. Izuku would never be able to understand why more people didn't respect him. Although most of this information wasn't exactly common knowledge for the general public, he still was a reason why heroes got training so they didn't perish in their first few years on the streets. Getting enough notes for an analysis that was up to his standards was difficult. Especially if he had decided to not hack into UA's files. The Academy's security was even stronger than what rumors suggested. It took Izuku days to get into, which was far more than the simple firewalls for the police database or government files were. Izuku had to judge what information to include and what to leave out. He didn't want to appear too suspicious, but he also wanted his practical exam to be the best it can be. It was a matter of picking and choosing between what could be found from extensive research and what could likely only be found within UA itself. There was a fine line of eager and stalker-esque research. It was one that Izuku was forced to juggle, to limit his words, his frustration with the system. He could deal with that in more inconspicuous ways that wouldn't affect his UA application. It was somewhat of a dilemma for Izuku. He wanted to prove his drive to UA and how his perseverance will overrule his quirk status. However, on the other hand, he didn't want to leave any reason for him to receive legal repercussions for illegally hacking through the school's firewall. He shook his head, looking over the analysis for any errors, both grammatically and information-wise. Izuku had been reviewing the first of his writings to come, merely skimming over it. He knew it'd take hours, if not days, for it to be up to par, but he decided to jump the gun and start early. Maybe he was a bit too keen. There was a few months until the practical. Izuku also had more plans for the night. He was getting restless as he sat at his desk. Izuku let his eyes wander to the time before a grin grew on his face. It was late enough that the type of people he needed to gather info on were likely milling around the streets. Izuku pulled on the dark hoodie and cargo pants that were meant to hide his form in the shadows of the night that would surround the alleyways of the not-so-nice neighborhood that Izuku lived in after his mom became much less involved in her son's life. He wasn't sure when the changes started with his mom. They had become muddled with time. The last time he remembered seeing her was a few weeks ago. Or was it months now? Years? He shook his head. There was no worth in dawdling on thoughts of where his mother could be. He had things to do and places to be. Most of those things were gathering information on known villains and their groups, preferably before they could cause any trouble. Oh, and pissing Tsukachi off. That was an important activity of his too. Well, doing the former tends to lead to the latter. Which is what he was off to do right now. He noticed an invention of Mei's that she had left behind a while ago sitting on his nightstand. An earlier prototype of a support item for Shinso. A voice changer that contained a gas mask built in as well. It hid most of the wearer's face from the nose down. Perfect for what he planned to do. He pulled it over his face before heading towards the fire escape outside his window. It wasn't a necessity, as there was no one to avoid, since no one else lived within his home, but the thought of any one of his neighbors noticing him dressed somewhat suspiciously wasn't on the itinerary. So, the fire escape was his current plan of action. It felt freeing. Walking the streets, avoiding the lights that shone from the spreaded spattering of lampposts that adorned the streets. Really, it shouldn't have been. Most people his age would have been home hours before, likely fast asleep by now. Although Izuku wasn't quite like most people his age, already working on college-level work by day and irritating detectives by night. Normal wasn't really in his vocabulary, huh? It didn't matter to him. Who'd want to live a boring life and abandon their ambitions? Not him, that's for sure. So he found himself walking the streets. Until he noticed a criminal he had been investigating. the leader of some small gang that had been planning a spree of robberies in a chain of banks. If he was right, he could get Tsukachi the evidence to provide a valid reasoning for an arrest, but without the cleanup needed for a bank robbery, that was likely to have hostages if his hunch about the villain's cruelty was correct. He scrambled to hide himself within the shadows of the alley, disguising himself from view, hidden from the gruff voices in front of him. He held out his phone, which thankfully was charged, beginning to record in case of evidence being presented to him. "Is this everyone?" A man spoke. "Can you get on with it? Some of us, in fact, aren't complete dumbasses and do have other jobs that we could be doing." A dark-haired man spoke. Izuku thought he was intriguing. The scars that ran across his face and arms, that seemed to be treated by someone with little medical experience. But what stood out most to him? The fact he could recognize exactly what had caused the scarring. They were burn scars, although maybe someone else would have recognized them, but Izuku has had burned flesh more times than he could count. There was a blonde girl that stood next to the man, also looking somewhat bored. She had a multitude of knives strapped onto her and was, oddly enough, dressed like a schoolgirl. Not quite the most common outfit for a villain. Something that he couldn't quite hear had a murmur rushing through the crowd. Fine. Since that seemed to have gotten your attention, I assume most of you will listen when I give the dates. Now, knowing how I feel about snitches, this is your last chance to chicken out. Leave now or stick with your decision. Unless you'd like to deal with the consequences naturally. The supposed leader, or at least the speaker of this meeting, spoke irritatedly. It was a wonder they hadn't been caught yet, with how loosely they were doing this. Once the dates and plan were mentioned, as well as the next meeting place, Izuku quickly stopped the recording, before escaping up another fire escape quietly. Honestly, villains were bigger idiots than heroes. It was kind of disappointing how simple that had been. Izuku grinned, grateful for his online classes, as they had led to him making his phone untraceable, which was perfect for things like this. Chaos incarnate. Tsukachi. My favorite detective. Lie detector, oh lord. Chaos incarnate. Rude. And to think I was going to give you evidence for that case you've been working on. Lie detector. Yours, you mean? Chaos incarnate. How about the string of bank robberies that you couldn't find a connection for? Besides, I can't believe you want to get rid of me so soon. You wound me. Lie detector. I can always hope. Lie detector. Anyways, send before I decide to regret my life decisions even more. Chaos incarnate. You're so impatient, I should tell you to ask nicely. But I want. This time. Chaos incarnate. Video attachment. Izuku grinned as he read over the messages, before turning off his phone. He knew just how to push Tsukachi's buttons. The grin quickly fell as he heard a voice behind him. So, kid, want to explain what you're doing out so late, recording meetings of known criminals? Not the safest hobby. It was the man that Izuku had found interesting, as well as the blonde who had been next to him. Oh, you're so cute. You'd be even cuter with blood, but wow. She twirled one of her blonde strands of hair around her finger, as her gold eyes shone. I'm Himiko Toga, but you can call me Himiko. Izuku narrowed his eyes on the two. He knew he couldn't trust them, especially if they were headed to an interest meeting about a robbery. The two practically came with warnings that screamed shady. And I should tell you why? Fortunately, the voice modifier worked perfectly. His voice came out almost indecipherable to his usual tone. With a multitude of voices speaking, both male and female, young and old. Just what he needed. Well, considering that if caught, you could deal with a whole lot of consequences. Look, I'll let this slide, as the job was boring and not worth what he'd been promising, but you owe me a favor. The dark-haired man said. He shoved his hands into his pockets. You don't seem so naive to believe that this favor is from the good of my heart, but the name's Dabi. You can call me Janice. For now at least. Izuku's eyes hardened as he looked at the two. I believe you'll see why as the time comes. He winked at the two before running and leaping onto the nearest roof, already ready to go find some other criminals, preferably without another conversation. Wait, hold on, what the F dash, kid? Dabi yelled as the other jumped. Izuku could barely keep himself from laughing as he heard the two sputtering behind him. He knew it wasn't every day that people watched someone of his stature leap from roof to roof, But surely villains weren't this easy to surprise. Though there was something about Dabi though, that Izuku couldn't put his finger on just yet. He knew that whether he owed the other a favor or not, he'd be seeing him again. The Greenette didn't enjoy leaving stones unturned. Burn scars like that weren't commonplace, even in this day and age of quirks. Whether self-inflicted or caused by others, most incidents didn't lead to that extensive damage. Himiko was interesting as well with her care for blood, but there was something in Dabi's eyes that Izuku knew were also within his own. It was guarded, sure, but as the saying goes, it takes one to know one. He stopped that train of thought while he could. There was a time and place to analyze the conversation, and while running on rooftops. Although he trusted his instincts and muscle memory most times, he also didn't want to run the risk of doing something stupid and getting injured. Aizawa would kill him if he missed training for something he could have prevented. Even though he wasn't aiming for the hero course, the disheveled man insisted that he also needed to keep up his strength and endurance. Which, considering that he didn't insist for Mei to do the same, was odd, but, then again, Mei was a force of nature. It was near impossible to force her to do anything that she didn't want to. A grin grew on his face as he noticed yet another criminal, albeit nowhere near as large as the first. No matter, anything to annoy Tsukachi was good enough. Izuku shook his head, trying to let his eyes take a short rest from the screen in front of him. He rubbed his temple, trying to ignore the pain shooting through. Izuku sighed. It was likely time to take a break, stretch a little bit, and maybe drink some water or eat something. That thought was quickly driven from his mind as soon as he saw a notification pop up from one of his monitors. Redacted. I remembered that you mentioned analysis during our last game. Is there any way I could look through some of what you're working on? Juggernaut. Unfortunately, any online copies are heavily coded and the cipher has long been destroyed. Juggernaut. And even sending images of the papers isn't ideal on this. Juggernaut. How do I put this lightly? Juggernaut. Well, I wouldn't quite want to put them on these sketchy servers. I mean, we had to personally encrypt our information and such. Redacted. Oh, I understand completely. Redacted. What if I gave you an encrypted way to contact me, outside of this site? Would that perhaps be better? Smiley face. Juggernaut. That would be better. Izuku smiled as Redacted sent his information over. Which should I show him? The ones for the UA exam are the best, but is that worth the risk? Izuku thought it was risky. That could easily expose his identity to the other, if they worked at or knew someone who worked at UA. But they were the most coherent and better thought out. Before he knew it, another message blinked before his eyes. Redacted. Oh, and do you mind sending me the coded versions rather than the images? I've always loved a good challenge. Juggernaut. Are you sure? It is heavily coded. Redacted. Send it my way. Izuku quickly sent it via the given contact information. He ultimately decided upon sending the one of Nedzu, with the section based upon weaknesses removed. Better safe than sorry. He'd hate to be the one who exposed Hiro's very own weaknesses. Izuku fidgeted for a bit, before deciding to head downstairs and drink something. It had taken him a year to decide on ciphers and how to decode what he had used to encrypt the analyses, so he knew Redacted wouldn't be able to decode it immediately, though the other would likely get through it much quicker than the average person. If Izuku was right, Redacted had an analysis quirk, based on his mannerisms and strategies. He glanced longingly at his coffee maker before finally stumbling over to his cabinets to get a glass of water. It'd be better for his health. Besides, he had already had so many mugs of the caffeinated drink that his hands had begun to tremble. Maybe it was better to wean off for a few hours before drinking another cup. Unlikely he'd last that long, but it was the thought that counts. He sighed, deciding to glance amongst his cabinets, seeing if there was anything to cook. His body was yearning for some kind of actual sustenance, rather than the usual hodgepodge of small snacks that he could quickly consume. Izuku grabbed some of the vegetables he had left from when he had last gone to the convenience store. It was meek and there was absolutely no protein, but it would be good enough for a salad, which didn't need too much prep work nor time to make. Easy and simple. Perfect. He hurriedly grabbed a knife to cut up the vegetables. It was mindless, motions he didn't need to focus too much on, almost second nature. As he finally cut up the last vegetable, he threw it all into a bowl and grabbed a fork before heading back upstairs. Izuku sifted through the files he had been previously looking over, looking for any cases that he could either help with, or that wouldn't be difficult to gain information on. All the better if it was a case of Tsukachi? Even better. A couple drag rings, a few muggings, a large amount of SXL harassment cases. Honestly, it brought bile to his mouth thinking about how many cases like these were swept under the rug. His eyes widened as he noticed a particular couplet of words. Quirk discrimination. Izuku opened the file, skimming across the contents. But cases like these were ignored, even if they did end up being reported. If no one else would help, he sure would. He was startled when his computer shifted to see a message from Redacted. He glanced at the time, noticing it had been a mere 6 hours from when he had originally sent the files. Was his encryption net weak? Or perhaps he had been wrong about Redacted's quirk. Perhaps it had something to do with ciphers specifically. Anything was within the realm of possibility with this age of quirks. But he needed to check their message. Focus, Izuku. Redacted. Impressive encryption. That took me much longer than usual. Redacted. Who taught you analysis? This is beyond impressive. You must be an asset for whatever agency you work under. Juggernaut. What do you mean agency? I'm self-taught. This is just a hobby from when I was really young. I started when I was like 4 or 5, I think. Really, I'm sure there are plenty of people who write much better. Juggernaut. This is actually for an exam for a school I'm applying to. Redacted. Then where did you get most of this info? Most of this information is restricted from public access. Juggernaut. I may have bypassed a few firewalls to get the information. Carrot. Redacted. Even more impressive. You got through the UA firewalls? And this is just work for a mere exam? How interesting. Redacted. How did you do it? Juggernaut. Again, I just don't think that's a good idea for me to spread. I hope you understand. I wouldn't like to be at fault for someone somehow getting a hold of it. Izuku groaned. This could get him in legal trouble if Redacted ever managed to discover his identity. He was unsure that other would, if put into that situation, but the risks still weighed heavy on his mind. This was going to give him more of a headache than any of his caffeine withdrawals could. He was regretting the choice of water rather than his usual coffee right about now. Maybe he should go and make a new pot. Did he even have coffee left over? Did he already need to head to the convenience store yet again? Redacted. I understand. Sadly, I don't have time to play a game of chess, but I'd be glad to read more of your analysis if you'd let me. Smiley face. Izuku sighed before letting his monitor dull, leaving him in the darkness of his room yet again. He glanced at his phone, ignoring the throbbing pain resting behind his eyelids. It was late, he should have already gone to bed, but he thought of the case he had been looking through earlier. He was tempted to continue working on it, but he knew he needed rest, or else he'd collapse. Quirk discrimination. Something that Izuku wouldn't claim to be impartial to. He knew exactly how the victims felt. He had been in their exact shoes before he had switched to online school. He knew the way cashiers immediately raised their prices after glancing at the quirk section on his identification. Izuku balled his fists and took a few slow breaths. It would do him no good to allow his anger to control him. He needed to be level-headed to make sure he would deal with this properly. To ensure there are no loose ends. He wouldn't let any person involved be left without consequences. Izuku knew he needed to shift his mind onto something else if he wanted to fall asleep instead of dwelling on his work and searching for hours upon hours about the situation. He knew it would be detrimental if he allowed himself to overwork himself and burn out. He sighed. Izuku knew it would be a little while until he fell asleep, but he might as well pretend that sleep wouldn't evade him for yet another few hours. After sitting what felt like an hour in the dark, sifting through the variety of thoughts plaguing his mind, he finally decided to check his phone. If he was going to end up staying up, he may as well be doing something. Better to be occupied than let him dwell on anything. He read through a few headlines, cringing at some blatant displays of power in areas that were highly populated and had lower crime rates. Izuku sighed. Limelight heroes sure were something. He appreciated their work, of course. But why couldn't they help out in areas that desperately needed even more help? It was why he tended to send more tips to underground heroes. partially because their patrol routes had much more crime and also because he held more respect for them most times. The topic of underground heroes made him think about Aizawa and his training tomorrow morning. He was going to be exhausted, he could already tell. It wouldn't be anything Izuku wouldn't be able to push through after a couple cups of coffee, but it certainly wouldn't be very pleasant. Plus it dulled his reaction times. Unfitting for the spars that were commonplace at their workout sessions. He groaned, checking the time. It was approaching 5 a.m., which left him 5 or 6 hours to sleep. But considering he hadn't slept in what felt like over 2 days, would that really be enough? Izuku really wished he was one of the people who could sleep no matter the situation. He was growing more and more envious of them by the minute. He blinked in surprise as his phone lit up with Shinso's name. Izuku knew the other boy also suffered from insomnia. The two had bonded over it and had complained about their relationship with sleep more than once, but it was uncommon for Shinso to call him regardless. Hello? Shinso? Izuku tried to sound as if he hadn't been contemplating if sleep was worth it mere seconds before. What's kept you up? Like you're one to talk, Shinso shot back while a deep chuckle escaped him. You're always up for one reason for another, although we never get to hear those reasons. You're deflecting, Izuku said in a cheeky voice, feeling slightly more energized than he had a few seconds before. He noticed talking to Mei and Shinso did that to him. He was still somewhat giddy about knowing them, despite having been friends for a couple of months. So are you, Midoriya? The other's voice crept through the speaker, making its way around the room. Izuku always thought everything seemed a little less bleak whenever he heard his friends' voices. A little less gray, as if them speaking alone could bring light into his life. Anyways, ready for hell training again tomorrow? I think he's going to have you and Mei present your practicals to him afterwards too, so you can both get a feel for what will happen. Shinso's intonation may have little variation usually, but Izuku had known the other boy long enough to tell that his voice held concern. Izuku wasn't always the best at public speaking. Whether he stuttered or was too rough, how someone could have that drastic of reactions, none of them could ever explain. He always managed to get nervous about presenting his analysis. It was only a childhood hobby after all. Izuku still struggled with shaking off his past, to prevent himself from hiding and protecting vulnerable parts of himself that could be exploited. Oh, don't worry, Shinso. I have worked through heaven and hell trying to make this perfect. I'm not going to let all my hard work go to waste. The pure, unadulterated confidence that nested within his voice made it difficult for Shinso to even protest. Izuku spoke as if it was pure fact, and maybe it was. Aizawa Shoto was many things. Tired and blunt were words that others commonly used to describe him. But more often than not, there was one thing people could agree that he wasn't. Patient. Which, it was more like he wouldn't waste time on you if you didn't have the potential nor drive to succeed. Was that unreasonable? To others, maybe. But it had worked for him, and he had been churning out good heroes for years. That had to say something about his judge of character, right? Some thought he was too picky or judged his students too quickly. That his expulsion rate was too high, although they ignored his success rate. It was a duality. You cannot have light without darkness, as they say. If there was one thing about Midoriya Izuku, he would be the embodiment of that light. Full of potential, with a heart of gold, and a quick wit to back it all up. His confidence may be lacking, but that can all be changed with due time and well-deserved support. He was going to be that support no matter the costs. That boy was going to do something far above what others could even imagine. Whether it be beneficial or detrimental would be all the difference between his tutelage. Shota could not let Niza meet him. The boy, being near genius, all the while quirkless, would put him on Niza's radar far too quickly than what any sane person could handle. If the principal got his hands on a personal student this smart, it could more than likely lead to the downfall of their own society as they know it. So, Shota took him on as his own student before the other could sink his claws into Midoriya's mind. To win against the rat or whatever he was, Shota still couldn't wrap his head around what his boss was exactly, and honestly it was better to leave things unknown. When it had to do with him, he would have to play dirty. And so be it. Besides, the two children that, despite being quite literally chaos incarnated, he had decided to adopt seemed to have already made quick work of becoming attached to the boy. He wishes Midoriya luck, because dealing with not one, but 2 of them was more than most could reasonably handle, and that was without considering his nervousness. He let a sigh escape him before pulling himself out of the neon sleeping bag. He had to meet Midoriya again with his 2 problem children for training again. He dragged himself over to the coffee maker, making the most potent batch he had yet. Shota could already tell that today was going to be exhausting. Hizashi sauntered from their bedroom, yawning as the sun hit his face. "Are you taking out Mei and Hitoshi today?" Shota groaned before shoving his face into the blonde's shoulder. "Don't remind me," he mumbled. He may love his husband, and the soft moments like these, to the moon and back. However, how the man ever convinced him to adopt both of the menaces, on top of their cats, was still an eternal mystery. Maybe Kiyama was right saying he was whipped. Naturally, speak of the devils and they shall arrive. Hitoshi and Mei slid into the room talking about Lord knows what. Something about some chemical Mei wanted to use for one of her new babies. T-Hat was something to nip at the bud. He grumbled to himself before speaking. "Mei, we are not allowing you more chemicals into this house." "But that's boring. Imagine. Just hurry and get ready or neither of you are seeing Midoriya today. I can and will leave you at home." A grin grew on his face. The 2 were already attached at the hip with the boy, making it a perfect bartering chip to get the 2 to behave. "Trying to take our Izuku privileges already? As if we're above going around you to see him." Hitoshi deadpanned, barely glancing at him before pouring the contents of the coffee pot into 3 mugs. Shota quickly nabbed his mug and drank it, his scalding tongue bedimmed. It was a necessity to get through today. "Hurry. Let's get going before I regret my decision." Mei and Hitoshi drank their mugs as he sat his into the sink, internally complaining of the thought of more dishes to be done once he gets home. Once the 2 had finished, he walked out the door, knowing that the 2 were already following him. As they sat on the train, Shota thought about how much easier his life would be if Hitoshi and Mei had been leash kids. Although that would be pointless, as there was truly nothing that could rein them in. At least, that was until Midoriya. The 2 were incredibly protective of the boy and were oddly calm around him. He had never seen Mei sit as still as when she discussed his analysis and blueprints with him. This boy had been creating blueprints for quirk mimicry technology. A concept that is often brushed over for tech that would rather help someone with their quirk than provide them with the artificial power of a new one. If the boy had a better understanding of mechanics and engineering, it was likely that he'd be making it himself. And now that Mei, who had the skills that he lacked, had picked up the idea. Well, it was an understatement to say that they'd take the world by storm. To top it all off, these observations still didn't reveal much about the enigma of a boy. The boy whose eyes burned so brightly, a flame stoked purely by his own motivation, in defiance of the own society that had disregarded him. The boy who held up his walls so tightly yet somehow connected and intertwined with them. So perhaps some of his training was because of him wanting to understand how the boy did it. How he continued to grow and flourish despite the people who he should be able to rely on letting him slip through the cracks. How he managed to remain so positive, yet also prepared for some sort of attack from any angle. If Shota ever manages to figure out what school the Midoriya goes to, he was going to let hell rain down upon it via Hitoshi and Mei's antics. That would be worse than any authority could allot, especially when their protective streak was considered. As he noticed the train reach their stop, he shifted his eyes towards the 2 children accompanying him. "Can you 2 stop wreaking havoc for 1 second and give off the train?" Hitoshi and Mei shared a grin before bolting off the train. The exhausted man continued on after them. No amount of coffee could let him even exist with the same energy as those 2. He shook his head, before continuing onwards toward the beach. And there Midoriya sat, atop of an old fridge. 2 notebooks sat on his lap and he seemed to be mumbling something to himself. Shota could hear bits and pieces but couldn't entirely discern what exactly the boy in front of him was thinking. Could be replicated, could DNA be used to, how to test, what material would be. Unfortunately, he didn't have all day to let the boy ramble. Shota cleared his throat, attempting to notify the other of their arrival. Midoriya blinked, before slamming his notebooks shut and smiling at the trio in front of him. That brings him to yet another one of the mysteries of Midoriya. The notebooks. They were commonplace in their meetings, although Izuku never allowed anyone to peer through them other than Mei, and even then, she was limited to what he allowed her to see. Certain notebooks, Midoriya hadn't let any of them see, he had noticed. What could he be hiding in them that required that much secrecy? Shota hummed, thinking to himself, or rather is it a mere case of trust, as he has only known us a short while. Shota also noticed how more of the scrap had been moved into the dumpsters by the boy. Whether this had happened this morning or another day, he didn't know, but did Midoriya ever allow himself to rest? Between whatever the notebooks contained, school, their training, and apparently cleaning up Dagobah on his own, how did he not run himself ragged? How close is your practical to done, Midoriya? You have just over a month, and knowing how meticulous you like to check things over. Shota once again glanced at the notebooks the other had just put away. One of them was likely his entrance, invention, for UA. Yeah, how much further have you gotten since we last worked on them together? Mei cheerfully added, grinning when she saw how Midoriya's eyes lit up. I'm just about done. Right now I'm double-checking sources and making sure I don't have anything else I want to add before I go and edit them all. If I manage to stay on track, I should finish just in time for the entrance exams. The green-haired boy smiled brightly, gesturing somewhat excitedly. I'm really proud of this one. It should be enough to get me in regardless of quirk status. UA was one of the first schools to allow quirkless students into its non-general education courses. Shiketsu was another, so Shota had encouraged him to still try out for support courses within other schools, even if for the mere point of having a backup plan. Not that Nizu nor Powerloader would deny this brilliant young kid from the program, but still, it was never a good idea to put all your eggs in one basket. So, he pointed Midoriya to a variety of schools with support and analysis programs. Shota knew the boy had the making of a hero. He was settling for the support course and he hated how he could relate to him. Although not quite the same, Shota had needed the sports festival to get into the heroics course. He would forever be bitter about the unchanged entrance exam. Why allow quirkless students into the heroics course if they and other students with non-physical quirks couldn't breeze through the entrance exam like their counterparts? He had brought it up to both the board and the Hero Commission, and yet no change was made despite them saying it would be brought into consideration. What bullshit! If only he could give them a piece of his mind. Although that couldn't happen in a mere month and a half, he must just ensure that Midoriya could get into the support course first. He had few doubts in the boy with how much of a perfectionist he can be, but he didn't want to leave anything to chance. Don't overwork yourself, or your quality and training will suffer. Take a break if you need, Midoriya, Shota sighed, ruffling the boy's hair lightly. I know. I'm being careful about it. Somehow, his already bright smile seemed to get bright enough to rival even the sun. Now enough chatter. Let's get started for today. Starting with the usual stretches, and then we'll do everything physical first before discussing you and Mei's practicals. The trio started to warm up, chatting warmly among one another. Although Mei had little interest in heroics, she insisted in at least taking part in some of their activities so she would have the strength to lift any material necessary for her babies. Shota glanced at the trio before groaning internally. If these three make it to UA, the trouble they'd get into was unimaginable. They were going to take UA by storm, and Shota couldn't determine whether that was a good thing or not. Izuku groaned. Today was the day. The day he had to bare his soul to UA's panel of judges and allow for them to decide his fate. Okay, maybe that was a bit of an exaggeration, but he had been doing analysis since before he had even been diagnosed, and bearing that part of himself to the world had never been quite pleasant. He knew it was unlikely that UA's staff would act as his schoolmates had, and even less likely that they would destroy it like how his peers had. But habits die hard, and Izuku had been hiding his analysis for years. Even showing Mei was difficult. But he was growing. He could tell. Izuku even showing Mei was a big step in the right direction. He just wished he could take the next step of showing Aizawa, as he had some suggestions for the man. Really, why hadn't he thought of putting his hair up already? And to change out his glasses for something much more practical that he truly believed could help the underground pro hero. He shook his head before getting himself out of bed. There was plenty of time to dwell on his own failures later. He couldn't allow himself to be late to the single-handedly most important exam he may ever take. that may dictate his whole future. Even more so considering it's one of the few schools that allow quirkless students in courses other than general education. So there was quite a bit riding on this one exam alone. He had also decided to apply to a few other schools, namely Shiketsu and some smaller support schools, but they kept their policies about quirkless students inconspicuously hidden or blank, which said enough in itself. He sighed. Izuku needed to abandon that train of thought before he spiraled. He knew he had prepared himself as best as he could for this moment, and Izuku was not going to let himself stop before he at least tried. Izuku had too many people put himself down, and he couldn't allow himself to join their ranks. So he quickly packed his 2 notebooks into his bag before reaching towards his door handle. He allowed himself one more second of doubt. Will UA really allow a quirkless student among them? Even though they say that they have policies against quirk discrimination, Aldra said the same thing. Naturally, that was when May slammed through the door, almost launching into him. Come on, Mr. Quirk Mimicry Tech. There would be a bunch of fools to not let you in. Plus, they'll have to deal with me. Her pink hair swung as she grinned wildly, cracking her knuckles. UA would have hell to pay if May was allowed to follow through whatever plan she had come up with. May, you know that if I let you do that, it would be a mere scorch mark on the ground. He chuckled at the reminder of her explosive tendencies. Besides, who says my notebooks are good enough? What if they really do want physical inventions and don't want analysis at all? And? They deserve it if they denied a beautiful brain like yours. Besides, you're my business partner. They can't only accept half the package. She cheered, gesturing wildly with her hands. Hitoshi, whom Izuku hadn't even noticed as he silently stood behind the eccentric girl, spoke up. Izuku, she's right. If they deny you and your abilities, that's a major loss to them. Especially if it's for something as minor as quirk status. Same goes to you, Mr. Hero Course. If you don't pass their biased quirk exam, you're going to make it through via the sports festival even if I have to drag you to victory. May said sternly. Izuku groaned at the two's antics. I get it. But if we're going to make it in, we need to get on the train now or we're going to miss the exam. Why did you say something before? The 3 scrambled to the train station, barely making it onto the busy train. There was a large number of teens their age, likely also on their way to their own entrance exams. A chatter filled the tense air of the train, and the trio didn't speak much to one another, all of them having their own thoughts on what may occur within the next few hours. Izuku nervously fumbled with the straps on his book bag. He could look over his notebooks again, but he knew better. If he'd second-guess himself, it was likely he'd self-sabotage, unintentionally correcting things that didn't need to be corrected. No, it was better to trust in the large amount of time and effort he put into them. They quickly hopped off the train, walking towards the UA gates. The large school stretched intimidatingly above them, large spires and windows dotting the buildings. This seemed like another attempt to weed out the easily daunted. Another test, perhaps. Izuku turned towards Hitoshi, flashing him a bright smile. You aren't allowed to forget us little people once you make it as a big-shot hero student, okay? The words barely had left his mouth before May jumped in. Right. Hero Course, if you stop talking to us, I'll make sure your equipment is faulty. And I won't let Izuku analyze your quirk and how to train it properly. The pink-haired girl cheekily chirped to the other. She winked at him and it was difficult to tell whether it was a joke or not. Knowing May, she could be telling the truth. May, we will not do that because that could very well get you in legal trouble. Besides, do you really think that Hitoshi could get rid of us? But if it'll make you feel better, then you better promise. Hitoshi, Izuku playfully narrowed his eyes at the other. Fine, I promise. Besides, the hero course will be full of flashy quirks. You both will be refreshing compared to... The insomniac rolled his eyes. Get going. We're going to miss the written part and I'm not willing to be smited by Aizawa that we missed it because of both of your chattering. The trio walked into the school, following the vague signs towards the written exam. They knew once they finished, they'd be split for the practicals. Izuku gave the two a hug. No matter what happens, give it your all. The 3 cheered before heading into the exam room. Izuku wrapped his hands around himself, trying to soothe his nerves as he walked to his seat. He knew that he knew the material like the back of his own hand. He had breezed through advanced school subjects with minimal effort, and he had put even more hours into researching quirk theory and quirk laws. Fortunately for him, the written portion of the exam was the same disregarding what course you were attempting to enter, so needn't worry about questions about mechanics being included. He sat in his seat and allowed himself to take in a deep breath. Izuku deeply regretted skipping this morning's coffee, although if they had waited they would have been late. Still, it would have been nice to have some caffeine rushing through him, making the experience all the more pleasant. Naturally, that was when one of the people around him decided it was the perfect moment to talk to him. "Hey, what course are you trying out for?" A cheery blonde spoke from the desk next to him. Izuku turned to the other, noting a black stripe within their hair in the shape of a bolt. A lightning quirk? Likely he was trying for the hero course then, so a possible future classmate of Hitoshi. The other was sitting there looking at him expectantly. "Alright." It was a social necessity to answer when someone spoke to you. Izuku quickly pulled a smile onto his face, wanting to end this conversation before his lack of morning caffeine caught up to him. "Oh, I'm trying for the support course." "You're working towards the hero course, right?" "Yeah." "I have no idea what we're going to be up against, but hold on, how did you know that?" The other titled their head to the side confusedly. "Oh, I'm into analysis, so it's just some observations I had made. If you get in, you should talk to my friend May, future owner of Hatsum Industries, for some support gear." He rattled off part of May's usual speech. Even if he didn't make it into UA, he would support May as much as he could. An unspoken promise to one of his first two friends, "But I have a friend going into the hero course too. Maybe you two will get in together." "They offer analysis at UA? I thought support was just for support gear and technology." A common assumption from most, but it still didn't settle quite right within Izuku. Usually. But there's exceptions, plus inventions aren't the only way to support a hero. He hoped the conversation would be dropped, as he could feel his ability to speak rationally and politely to the other dying out and fading as he anticipated more and more from the exam. It felt like a small blessing when Ectoplasm and a posse of his clones walked into the room and began passing out tests to the gathering of students. The booklet was thicker than the usual entrance exam, including the ones to the more normal high schools he had grudgingly applied to, but it still seemed doable. "Welcome to the UA written entrance exam. This test contains both questions from your usual subjects as well as a few other subjects. You have a total of 3 hours to complete the entirety of the exam to the best of your capacity. Any questions?" A tense silence began to fill the room. No one dared to speak a word, not trusting their own voices to stay resilient against the pressure that encompassed the exam. "No? Then your time starts now." Izuku felt a grin grow in his face as he breezed through the questions that were intended to be based on what they should have learned in school. How could all his previous teachers tell him that he was behind everyone else? These were child's play for him. The questions on hero laws were even easier, being things he had actually researched even before middle school. And then he had gotten to the end of the packet, where the questions on quirk theory were. Izuku's eyes lit up like a young child's left unsupervised in a candy store. The questions were almost analysis-based, something he had been training exactly for what felt like his entire life. His pencil flew across the page, making quick work of filling up the provided lines and whatever extra room he could scrounge up for each question. Midoriya turned in his booklet feeling surprisingly satisfied with how he thought he had done. Ectoplasm blinked in surprise, a look of something akin to fear lighting up within his eyes. Izuku glanced towards the clock, wondering how he had been the first to finish. That was only 45 minutes? He thought to himself. Ectoplasm coughed, getting the younger's attention. "Ahem, please head outside towards the benches. You will unfortunately have to wait until the remaining time is up before beginning your practical." Izuku nodded cautiously, before leaving the room. No matter how he did on the written exam, he still had to pass the practical to even get into the support course. Izuku refused to settle for simply the general education course. Although, wasn't entering the support course also settling? Shouldn't he be taking the hero course practical to truly prove himself? Izuku shook his head as others began to join him in the room. He couldn't allow himself to spiral too much. He needed to focus and make sure he wouldn't stumble within his presentation. Before he knew it, the test had ended and the rest of the examinees had joined them in the room. Names began to be called and the blonde slid back into the seat next to him. You must be really smart. You finished that test really fast. Izuku was feeling too giddy to be annoyed at the other person next to him. I just studied really hard, I guess. I've always been okay at school, so I guess that helped too. He smiled genuinely at the other as chatter filled the room around them. I wish I had it easy. I feel like I barely passed it. They groaned. Oh, right. I never got your name. I'm Kaminari Denki. Midoriya Izuku. I'm sure you did better than you thought. Denki cheered. I sure hope so. I'm sure you made it in. You're probably some genius. Izuku chuckled lightly at their antics, unable to let the smile drop from his face. Any giddy feeling quickly left him as he heard his name get called. Midoriya Izuku? Standing up, he quickly waved to Denki. You should probably head off, by the way. This is waiting for the support exam. Huh. The blonde scurried off as Izuku allowed himself to be led into the room. Izuku allowed himself to be brought along into the room. He fidgeted with his hands, trying to shake off any nerves that were knotting in his stomach. Izuku had prepared for this. He was ready. There would be no doubt of him earning a spot within the support course. Although he almost crashed into the ground when he saw the panel of judges, Power Loader, a support mechanic from one of the companies raved over, and Nizu. Naturally, because if it wasn't already nerve-wracking enough to merely present his analysis to someone else, of course that someone else managed to be one of the people he had written the most about. The universe seemed to be conspiring against him at this point. No matter. UA was his dream school and he wouldn't give it up for the world, even if this panel of judges was likely his worst nightmare. Hold that thought. His worst nightmare would probably include both All Might and Aizawa on this panel as well. The man who forced him to think realistically, and the reason why he settled for chose the support course, and the other someone he never wanted to disappoint. He sighed before gracefully grabbing his notebook out of his bag and placing them upon the desk. Before you even read over my file, I'm going to tell you point blank that I'm quirkless. It may provide some insight from where I come from with my thought processes. If you would like, feel free to page through the notebook. It has everything I'm going to go over. Usually I would encode them. Izuku twirls one of his curls around his finger, but decided not to for the sake of you all having the ability to read them. A small murmur grew about the room as looks that he couldn't quite decipher were held towards him. Nizu seemed to greedily paw through the pages and Izuku had to physically keep himself from tumbling over words and fidgeting. I may not have some quirk to lean on like a crutch, but imagine the work ethic that comes with this quality. I will always have to work harder to be equal in the eyes of my peers and I am willing to do what it takes to get there. I know I can. Quirkless or otherwise. Izuku confidently continues rambling on about the variety of heroes he had chosen, his methods of analyzing and choosing which heroes he was going to do for this particular notebook and answering whatever questions came up from the panel. Could have sworn he saw a glint shine within the stoat's eyes as he watched Izuku talk. It was somehow the most comforting part of the whole situation, despite everyone else seemingly being uncomfortable by any glance they snook at the principal. Now Midoriya, I won't deny you're a bright boy. But why analysis? What led you to this path? His smaller white paws somehow interlaced. Izuku couldn't seem to decide how to react to him. This could mean that the principal had taken an interest in him, which could heighten his chance in getting in. Now he just needed to take advantage of the chance he had been given. I had originally started analysis really young. Somewhere from like 4 to 5 probably, Izuku asked, more to himself rather than anyone in the room. I had first and foremost wanted to be a hero before I had received some unsolicited and harsh advice. I, unlike many others, got lucky and someone found me and talked with me about how analysts can help heroes, and if I can save someone somehow, whether directly or indirectly, I do it in a heartbeat. No hesitation or questions asked. He watched the stoat nod, before turning to a specific page in the notes written upon the notebook. Now I hate to be unnecessarily nosy, but how did you get some of this information about me? I went out of my way to try and hide a lot of this information about my past and deeper details about my quirk. It wouldn't be easy feat to unearth this depth of information. I simply made use of my own skills. Izuku vaguely responded, knowing that the stoat would catch on to what he could legally say directly. Now you may be asking yourselves how this may be a valuable part for the support course? Well, firstly, using analysis can be easily used to help heroes better themselves and apply themselves in different ways. On the other hand, it can be used to assist in takedowns of villains by utilizing their weaknesses. He let his eyes drift across the panel. Izuku knew he really needed to sell his point here, to drive it home, on why he should be allowed in a highly prestigious school despite the fact that he had no quirk to rely on. Besides, I do have blueprints and plans for quirk analysis-based technology, I've just never had the materials necessary to make them. But now, with access to UA's support labs, imagine the possibilities. He let a sharp grin grow as his eyes glistened with mischief. It could, let's say, level the playing ground a little. Truly prove that heroism is directly correlated with character rather than quirks? The silence was deafening, the tension so thick that it almost made it difficult to breathe. Izuku had to count his breaths to keep himself calm. He may have gone a tad overboard, but the dramatics were almost vital to ensure his spot. The man who had let him in, who Izuku now recognized as ectoplasm now that he wasn't unable to think from his nerves, gestured for him to leave the room. So Izuku smiled once more, before leaving the room. What's said is done. Well, of course, until it isn't. Midoriya. Hearing the principal's cheerful voice almost stopped his heart. This wasn't part of his plan. He had wanted to just walk away and go back to his home and cry and watch low-quality movies with Mei. Is there anything you need, Mr. Nizu? It took every fiber of Izuku to keep his voice level, forcing out any potential cracks or stutters. It wouldn't do him well to show any ounce of weakness now. Oh, drop the formalities. First, you left one of your notebooks in the exam room. The other handed it to him, before grinning again. Besides, I was wanting to talk to you. Think of it like another interview? There's more I'd like to know about you and your analysis. Izuku really didn't want to agree, but who knows how poorly it'd look if he did not go along. It would ruin all the months of hard work he had put in. The work Aizawa put in helping in, the time and effort Mei helped with his confidence and work. The constant kindness and encouragement from Shinso. Izuku felt his resolve solidify. If not for himself, then for what his found family did for him. If you believe that there's more to hear, then who am I to deny? Lead the way, sir. Izuku knots his fingers together, trying to keep himself calm. For all he knew, it'd be surface-level stuff, unrelated to people he knows or his more odd and uncommon hobbies. Again, drop the formalities. I have so many questions for you and not enough time for all the answers. Nizu's eyes shone with something that was almost unrecognizable to the green-haired boy. He couldn't tell whether to be worried or excited about it. The principal was a knowledgeable man, and there's so much he could learn from him even from a singular conversation. The stoat walked off, Izuku dazedly following him. This could easily be trouble. Who was he kidding? This was definitely trouble. Yet, he decided to follow him anyway. It could be a good decision. Maybe it meant that he had caught the principal's attention. Or perhaps it was simply a screening, a way to test examinees of their character. A way to weed out those weak of heart, that didn't have truly what it takes to make it through. Hey, he never denied his flair for dramatics. Being both Mei and Hitoshi's friend lead to some of their key traits rubbing off on him. What could he say? They walked around UA and Izuku tried to memorize the twists and turns as they went, although he could tell that Nizu was likely leading him a roundabout way to wherever they were headed. It would certainly be something the principal would do, with his love of trickery of the mind. But safe was always better than sorry, and it was a good way to keep his mind on something while they continued on in utter silence. He saw a mix of teachers and students, who were all giving the two incredulous looks. Was this really out of the norm? Surely the principal had passed by with other students during the exams? Or perhaps it was other teachers interviewing them instead of Nizu, hence the surprise. It wouldn't change much either way. Besides, these looks were far more harmless than those he was used to from school. The disgusted looks from most of his peers were a far cry from them. The pitying looks were even worse. Those grabbed at his deepest insecurities, made him almost forget any words from Aizawa, Hitoshi, and Mei, and let All Might's words rush over him once again. Realistic choices. Wouldn't you be oh so proud, a symbol of peace? He thought to himself. Izuku's attention snapped back into place once they had reached a surprisingly underwhelming door. It could have been a janitor's closet in comparison to the other much bolder doors. They were huge while this one was much, much smaller. Conspicuous. Nizu grinned. I didn't want anyone wandering in there unwanted and finding any sensitive information. Izuku nodded, not trusting his voice to speak how he needed. His thoughts likely wouldn't come out half coherent, and he didn't want to make a fool out of himself and risk his chances at his dream school. Sure, he planned to go through with other exams, like Shiketsu, but it wouldn't be the same. Besides, wouldn't it be salt in the wound for All Might to watch him get into one of the best hero courses offered in Japan, especially through the sports festival? Are you ready, Izuku Midoriya? Mischief surrounded Nizu. No matter how this went, Izuku knew he could become a hero. Even if today went poorly, there were tons of schools that would be lucky to have him. Although Hitoshi and Mei wouldn't be going there, so it would never be truly the same. So he was more than ready for the fate of himself and his future. And of course, to spite the one and only All Might himself. Team Midoriya? The stoat cheerfully spoke as he set down a cup in front of Izuku. He could use the excuse that the drink may calm his nerves, however. In reality there was no way in hell that he would have been able to deny the principle in that moment. He took a sip of the cup in front of him, scalding his tongue. He noticed Nizu's calculating eyes watching him as he carefully sat it back down onto the saucer. What did you need to know, sir? Izuku meekly let the words out, merely wanting to get back to the solace that was Mei and Hitoshi's company. He felt almost like a sitting duck. This was Nizu's territory, where he had little control. For all he knew, the principal had him exactly where he wanted. Izuku hated it. He hated feeling like he had his back to a wall, with little way to escape except straight towards the danger. In due time, the smile that stayed on the stoat's face was growing more and more irritating. Izuku had to reel himself in, reminding himself that this was the principal of a school he had just applied to, and it wouldn't be a good move for him to blatantly disrespect the other. He merely allowed his thoughts to stir and stew amongst one another. Now, no need to worry. It's just a few basic questions, no stress. He watched the other's paws intertwine and the shine of mischief in his eyes. Nizu sifted amongst the papers within the notebooks, sometimes pausing at a particular page, smile widening. First things first, how did you hear of the analysis track? It isn't very popular, and it's been a few years since we've had anyone who was interested, much less made it in. Well, I had originally wished to go into the hero course. However, after some advice led me elsewhere, I wasn't even going to apply to UA at all. It was actually a mentor of mine who let me know about this analysis track. Izuku kept his voice level. He couldn't let one show of weakness, no sliver of vulnerability slip through. A mentor, you say? Who would this mentor be? As they'd have to be knowledgeable on you. Nizu tapped his paws lightly on the desk. Also, their analysis would also have to be good, no? I mean, the quality you produce is incredible. I can't imagine how good they must be to have taught you. Well, firstly, I'm self-taught in analysis. I started when I was around 5 or 6, and have the old notebooks I wrote in to prove it. Was it an analysis of quality like today's? Of course not, but still my own work nonetheless. And my mentor? Well, I use the term loosely, so to speak. Izuku was dancing around the questions, barely weaving around the answer, and he could tell that Nizu had noticed from the slight narrow in his eyes and a change in pattern of how he had been flipping through the pages. Izuku forced himself to relax, allowing himself to settle in the seat, letting his muscles untense, unlocking his jaw, shoving all his nerves into a small box in the back of his mind. If he wanted to truly fool Nizu and avoid answering all his questions directly, he needed to be convincing. You're self-taught? That's almost unbelievable with the quality that you're writing with. There's just about no stone unturned. The stoat waved his paws around, to accentuate his point, You've been doing this 10 years, you say? Roughly. I started young, Izuku shrugged. I'm sure it is measly compared to professional analysts. Niza gave him a look he couldn't quite decipher. Whether it was good or bad, he may never know. The lack of human-like facial features didn't help either. Maybe not knowing was better, to keep him from backing down. How do you get the info on the heroes you write about? These all seem to be very in-depth. Have you interviewed them? Nizu paused on a page, eyes widening at something that had been written, before speaking again. You seem to know the ins and outs of their quirks. I can't seem to believe that you did this all by observation alone. Ah well, he scratches his neck and chuckles nervously. Most of it is stuff I noticed during heroes' fights. There are some things that are just speculation of mind and a few very small details that I have asked directly, but most of it is just what I can make connections based on. Izuku barely maintains himself from fidgeting nervously. Nizu blinks, looking surprised? Surely not. Izuku couldn't have thrown the being with one of the highest known IQs off guard. He wouldn't allow himself to think that for a moment. That was far too conceited. So, instead of mentioning it, he makes the choice to deliberately take a sip of his tea. Nizu seems to gather himself, after whatever that brief moment was. Your skills, they're impressive. I think that's all I have time for today, unfortunately, but I'd love to pick your brain a bit more sometime, Midoriya. Izuku shakes off the haze that seemed to fill his brain. Nizu wanted to talk to him more? He barely could process that thought, so he elected to ignore it until later. As most people who are mentally healthy do, naturally. It's my pleasure, Nizu sir. I really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day to discuss my analysis with me. It was an honor. Izuku bowed quickly, before he was led out of the room, to be escorted again by ectoplasm. The pro seemed to feel nervous around the boy. He quickly led Izuku to the front gate of UA, not even attempting to make small talk. The few teachers and students they passed seemed to question what the deal was with Izuku being walked to the exit by a hero, directly from the principal's office. Not the most commonplace occurrence, that was to be certain. He was scrawny, held himself with little confidence, and was plain in appearance. He could tell what most were probably thinking. What was a boy like that doing in a prestigious school like UA? The adrenaline that he felt when talking with Nizu was slowly beginning to wear off, and he was ready to binge shitty movies with Mei and Hitoshi. Izuku felt drained. Maybe a nap would be better. Izuku bumped into someone hard. That hurt. He rubbed his temple, trying to get the spike of pain to go away. Sheik kid. I wasn't paying attention. Are you Midoriya? Good to see you. How did your support course exam go? Aizawa, the one who had bumped into him apparently, spoke. Here, ectoplasm, I'll take him from here. There seemed to be a silent conversation between the two. Izuku wished they would just speak aloud. He could try to discern what those glances meant, but there was too great of a chance he'd misunderstand. Not to mention the fact he just wanted to pass out, he could barely think properly as is. The two began walking out the gate. Izuku sighed. I think the exam went well. Although, Nizu had a meeting with me himself, so maybe it went worse than I thought. I guess I won't know until the acceptance letters are out, right? Aizawa stopped in his tracks at that. Like seriously? Izuku wasn't even joking or making any kind of bullshit story up. The grown man stopped walking midway through the crosswalk, being left behind for a moment before the boy realized. What? Disbelief was clear on the somewhat shabby man's face. Kid, if you're pulling my leg right now, I swear to God I will make you train until you puke. Again. No. Aizawa, in our months of training have I lied to you? Do you really see me that lowly? Izuku let a sheet-eating grin escape onto his face. He was really into my notebooks, I think. Aizawa groaned. You are going to be the absolute death of me. Get into your apartment before you give me a slide. Izuku chuckled, not knowing what had made his mentor react so weirdly, but he knew that Hitoshi and Mei were waiting inside and he was ready for movies at this point. I'll see you tomorrow. The usual time? Don't ask questions you already know the answer to. With that, Izuku unlocked his apartment and waved the man goodbye. He was only given a moment before he was tackled by Mei. How'd it go? They had to have loved you, right? It only makes sense if you took this long. Tell me what you can. Where did they take you? Why did no one else go? May, let him breathe. Hitoshi laughed. He can tell us all in a second, he just got here. Izuku could feel himself, a fond look crossing his face as he heard the purple-haired boy. How about a shitty pre-quirk movie marathon while we talk? I am about ready to pass out. He laughed. There never was a dull moment when the trio was all together. He had no idea where he would be without him. May grabbed him and Hitoshi by the hand and quickly dragged them to the living room. She turned on some random movie before turning back to Izuku. Okay, spill. And don't leave out any details. I want to hear everything, you hear me? Her pink hair swayed with her eccentric motions, further making her energy noticeable. Well, Izuku paused, both to add suspense and to tease May, who had started to lean in as he spoke. They brought me in to see the principal. Genuinely thought they were going to deny me immediately and mock me for my lack of quirk. He chose to shift his gaze away as he felt the burn of the pointed stares from his closest friends. Anyways, he ended up asking me a bunch of questions about my analysis, where I had learned when I started the basics. Izuku sighed, before laying his head into Hitoshi's lap. I either completely failed or passed with flying colors. I guess we'll know whenever the letters come out. Hitoshi tensed for a moment, before allowing his hand to rest in Izuku's hair. Izuku allowed himself to relish in the comfort and warmth of his friends. He wished that it could always be like this, away from reality, just the three of them. Little wisps of time like these always felt like an oasis in a desert. He could never ever get enough of them. Hitoshi began to comb his fingers through Izuku's hair. Izuku leaned into him, smiling softly. May rested her feet atop Izuku's. They began to actually pay attention to whichever movie May had put on. Izuku cringed at some of the leaps they had taken to explain what was, or at least very similar to, a quirk. I mean, a radioactive spider bite? What were movie directors thinking pre-quirks? They let reality wash away from the trio, ignoring it while they could. No more discussing their entrance exams, that was an issue for their future selves, when they could learn whether they passed or not. There was little they could do to change it now, and there was no reason to dwell on what could have been done. Izuku let the fondness wash over him as he felt his heart swell with affection for the two he had barely known for a few months. Sometimes, it really did feel like them against the world. Izuku had been amping up the training at his local dojo yet again. He knew he had been slacking off between applying to UA and training with Aizawa, but there was no excuse. After all Ojiro had done for him, it wasn't right for him to leave him behind with little explanation. Ojiro had been one of Izuku's first real friends from before he even knew Hitoshi or May. He had a quirk that most didn't find powerful enough for heroics and yet still found other ways to strengthen himself and push himself towards his goals despite what others thought. The boy had even stood up for him when some bullies had cornered him and even offered to teach him martial arts so he could learn to defend himself on his own. He didn't even care about Izuku's quirklessness. So maybe that may have been the main reason for Izuku's soft spot for the boy. Could you blame him? It was hard to find friends who didn't care whether you had some strong and powerful quirk or not rather than actually caring about personality. They traded hits, evading one another as best as they could. Izuku blinked, noticing a flaw in Ojiro's technique and quickly dodged his hit, before knocking him over onto the mat. That was a close one. He grinned before quickly grabbing a towel to wipe off all the sweat that had collected during their spar. Izuku reached out a hand to Ojiro, before pulling him back up to standing. I swear I'm going to beat you one day, Ojiro sighed, as his tail shook off some dust that had been on the mat. Did you apply for the hero course at any high schools? They must be drooling over you between your hand-to-hand combat abilities and analysis. Izuku tried not to let the smile he was holding drop, but his disappointment was almost palpable. He had thought about applying to some courses other than UA's support course, however it was the only school with an acceptable education that allowed quirkless students. Not surprising, no matter how much it set him off. I wish. A lot of schools are really picky about the quirk status of their students, especially hero courses. Izuku rubbed the nape of his neck, feeling slight discomfort in his situation. I did end up applying to UA's support course though. I know you were trying for their hero course, right? How did that go? The entrance exams were only a little while ago, right? Tell me all about it. Ojiro gave him a sad, but knowing smile before talking about his entrance exam. He had talked to the boy previously about his fallen dreams to be a hero, though those days of innocence were long gone and they both knew it. That was the other thing about the boy, he always seemed to be able to tell how Izuku was feeling, no matter how much he tried to hide it. It was a special talent of his, something Izuku would have guessed was his quirk if the other didn't have the obvious tail. I'm glad it went well for you. You have to tell me if you get in, though I'd be surprised if you didn't. Your quirk has so many uses. If we both get in, we may see each other. Izuku grinned, true feelings of excitement rushing through him. He really did want the best for Ojiro. You let me know too. Ojiro's tail wagged a bit as he smiled fondly at Izuku. Really, the green-haired boy was so lucky to have a long-lasting friend like him. He let himself bask in the solace of the moment, before he glanced at the time. Sheet, I really gotta get going. Thank you for sparring with me. Same time tomorrow? He had yet another chess game planned in less than half an hour and he really couldn't be late. He was going to find out who Redacted was today, even if it took every fiber of his being. Don't let me keep you. Ojiro waved before Izuku left the dojo. Izuku let himself weave through the crowd, trying to get back home as quickly as he could. He may have been taking a few more risks than he usually would, taking back alleys and bumping into people that maybe he shouldn't have. Curiosity killed that cat, many would say. Though he was a firm believer in the second part of that saying, satisfaction brought it back. He often found himself in trouble due to his curiosity and he would be the first to admit it. However, the satisfaction of having his queries and theories answered seemed to always make up for it. He reached his apartment luckily with minimal scuffles with other people. Izuku quickly booted up his laptop, opening the chess program they normally used. A glance at the clock showed he was right on time for their game. A second later and he may have missed it. Redacted, hello. I was worried you were going to miss our weekly game. Juggernaut, I wouldn't dream of it. Had some other commitments that held me up beforehand or I would have been earlier. Izuku quickly moved upon. He hated starting the games, much preferring to gauge what his moves were going to be based on how his opponent started. Redacted, I'm glad you made it. The week would simply never be the same without a game. Juggernaut, I'm sure you would have made it through the week one way or another. Besides, you know we can always reschedule. They traded moves back for a little while, settling into one pattern before quickly switching into another before the lull of the game got too relaxed. It was exhilarating how much the other could keep Izuku on his toes. Redacted, have you done any more analysis recently? You really should send them to their hero agencies so they can read it as well. Your insight is delightful. That made Izuku pause, almost faltering in his moves in the game before he quickly recovered, sighing at his moment of weakness. Redacted had been continuing to try and encourage him to send his analysis to the actual heroes that he had written about. As if they'd take him seriously. He was just some teen who wrote analysis for fun. They all had paid professional analysts who surely had already made the realizations he had and told their respective heroes. Juggernaut, I've thought about it but I stand by my point. Who even would take me seriously? I would want to stay anonymous and it could come off in the entirely the wrong way. Redacted, and I still stand by what I said. Redacted, but fine, what if I got someone to vouch for your credibility? Juggernaut, who is high enough in power for it to be enough for an anonymous analyst to be taken seriously? What, do you have connections with Nizu or something? And then, Redacted did something in the game that he had never done beforehand. He made a fatal, unintentional mistake. One that had cost him the whole game. Juggernaut, oh my god. You're kidding me. Izuku shoved away from his desk, chair rolling backwards into a gradual stop. He blinked as suddenly it felt like every piece began to line up and click right into place. Redacted was Nizu. Redacted, the player who constantly encouraged him to share his analysis, who he played weekly chess matches with, who he had shared his quirk status with, was the one and only Nizu, principal of UA, who ultimately was going to decide if Izuku could attend his school or not. How deep of a hole had he just dug himself? How was he going to get out of this? Was it even possible? Izuku took a breath. He exhaled before moving back to his laptop. He just needed to keep calm. He has deceived Tsukachi, hacked into police stations, trained with Aizawa, and more. He could get himself out of this situation with ease. Izuku just needed to focus. Juggernaut, maybe I will. I don't know where I'd even start though. He needed to make sure that he never shared any analysis that he showed during his support exam to Redacted. Nizu? Whatever you wanted to call him, Izuku was going to try and keep his identity secret for as long as he could. So he moved his rook. Juggernaut, checkmate. Smiley face. Redacted, ruthless as ever I see. Taking advantage of my distractedness. Juggernaut, all's fair in war. Did you really expect better from me of all people? Izuku stretched, cringing at the crick in his neck from how he had been sitting. He blinked, rubbing his eyes as he moved them away from the light of his computer screen. He ran his fingers through his hair, thinking about the movie night he had with his friends the night before. What would Hitoshi think of him doing this? He would worry for his safety a bit too much. Mei would be excited, glad someone else saw use in his genius, as she always chose to call it. He grinned, what a trio they all were. Redacted, you caught me there. Redacted, still, you send in your analysis to any agency of your choice and I'll have Nizu send in a recommendation. Redacted, just preferably let me know which agency first. Juggernaut, let's start with just one then? How about present mix agency? Does that work for you? Redacted, sounds perfect. I'm very excited for you, Juggernaut. You deserve credit and recognition for the work you're doing. Juggernaut, don't praise me too much, my ego may get even bigger. Izuku laughed to himself before starting another game. The sun was setting and he was getting tired, but his brain was going a million miles a minute. He may never truly know the reason why he agreed, knowing he could very well be putting his entire identity in jeopardy, but some small little part of himself was yelling at him that he couldn't risk losing this opportunity. While continuing the game, moves being played without a thought, almost by second nature. Izuku quickly found the email for Present Mike through his agency. Clicking through the site and searching laws to make sure he wasn't doing anything too illegal. Once he was certain he wasn't going to immediately have a bunch of pros show up at his apartment, he opened his email that he always used to reach Tsukachi, knowing it was much more protected and encrypted than any of his others. Both for his own safety, and for the safety of his notes and their dangerous information. They still needed a cipher to read them, one of his easier ones to decrypt, but safe was always better than sorry. Present Mike? I was originally never going to let these reach the light of day and rather have them remain with me and gather dust. But someone suggested perhaps that you could make more use of them than I can. Please do not take anything included as insults or dangers. I merely want to help heroes improve and do not mean to insult your current progress and accomplishments as a hero. I know how much effort you put into your job and do not mean to seem like I think you're weak or lacking any skills. All of my work is encrypted and this email is private. Don't worry about any leaks. I'm sure there is someone at your agency who will easily be able to read this. File attached. Wishing you all the best. Juggernaut. Izuku groaned. He had the email open, it staring at him for the almost hour that he continued playing games with Redacted that had slowly shifted from chess to other mind games. He knew that no matter how this went, for better or for worse his life would change. So he made the decision. He didn't want to think of what-ifs. He didn't want to feel like he was wrapped in regret, because what a waste of all the effort and time he put into his work. He stared at the laptop monitor before making a decision that he hoped he wouldn't later regret. Redacted, are you all right? You haven't made a move in a little while. You haven't fallen asleep, have you? Juggernaut, I'd try and get that recommendation soon. I sent the analysis. So, hey there. A lot has happened. Like a lot. But here's an update on what happened, what's going to happen, and some decisions. Long story short, I got ridiculously busy and didn't have time to update for a variety of reasons despite wanting to. So what am I going to do with this story? I read through this and there is so many pacing issues and other things I want to fix, because I feel that I can write better than what I posted here. However, I can also just produce better chapters from here on out and work with the story as is. Or, I will rewrite the story, fixing a lot of the plot holes and pacing issues. I feel like I can create a much more satisfying story that will be more enjoyable to read. I will likely leave this up, but leave it discontinued. I want to know you guys' opinions, what you'd prefer. I don't want to totally scrap this, but I feel like it is super cliché and I want to try and stray from the norm a bit with some new ideas I've had. Whether I continue the story as is or rewrite it, I'll probably delete this chapter, just because I'd rather it not be included with my writing. I'm so sorry for the wait. This is not the end for Izuku in this story, though it may change a lot. Thank you for all the kind comments and kudos while I was gone.